Previously, we have implemented synchronization of local variable activity with text inside of input field, so that whenever the text will be modified, it will instantly update our local variable. But there is another way which Vue provides us with, which is much easier, to basically do the same thing, synchronize some variable with input field. So inside of the activity form component, we were previously using vbind directive to bind the activity variable to value attribute. And then we attached listener for input event, and whenever this event occurred, we were manually updating value of activity variable. And for such cases, Vue provides us with another directive called vModel that will automatically do synchronization of variable with input field. So we need to specify variable name that we wish to bind to this input. In our case, it is activity variable. And basically this notation replaces previous two lines. So now these lines can be removed. So now in the browser, if we will type text inside of input field, we will see the same result. Value of activity variable will be properly updated. And sure enough, after submission of this form, we're gonna see new list item at the bottom of the page. So new activity was created. But let's also improve user experience a bit by resetting value in this text field after form submission. And we're gonna add the line to clear value of input field within this submit handler. Right after the form gets submitted, we're gonna manually assign empty string to activity variable. And just because this variable is bound to an input field, we're supposed to see that the field will be cleared. But what we actually see in the browser, the text remains in the field. So our current implementation does not really work as expected. And that is happening because currently our activity variable isn't reactive. And Vue does not monitor changes made to this variable and doesn't re-render certain parts of the DOM that rely on this variable, for example, our input field. So even after assigning empty string to activity variable, changes are not reflected within input field on the page. And just to make Vue update DOM structure whenever activity variable will change, we're gonna turn this variable into a reactive variable by using ref function in here. And now everywhere where we reference activity variable, now we need to reference value property. Let's do it in here. And also when we assign empty string. And this way you should detect that we assigned empty string to a reactive variable, and it should go ahead and clear text field. So let's also not forget an import ref function from the Vue package at the top of this file. And right now in the browser, after submitting this form, we will notice that the text field got cleared. And since we no longer reassign activity variable, it makes sense to make this variable constant. And finally, one more improvement that we can do to activity creation form is to disable submission button whenever text field is empty. So let's assign new attribute in here called disabled. And we're gonna determine when to disable this button based on the following condition. Here we're gonna compare activity variable with empty string. So whenever text field will be empty, this button should get disabled. And thanks to Vue attribute inheritance, all attributes specified on components that are also not declared by macro-defined props or define emits, they are automatically get inherited by the root element of component. And in our case, root element of base button component is button element, so that disabled attribute will be applied to this button. And looks like it is working. We see that the button was disabled. But in fact, if input field will only contain space characters, the button gets activated and we have a way to submit this form, and then we're gonna end up with empty activity name. And just to prevent this from happening, in this expression, let's use method trim to trim empty spaces on both sides of this string before comparison. And finally, it is working as expected. Whenever I type empty spaces, we see that the button remains disabled. And only when I type one non-empty character, I will be able to submit this form.